Hello, this will be an in-depth overview of the Spyro A Hero's Tale demo present on issue 51 and 61 of the official PlayStation Magazine demo discs. There are quite a lot of differences from the final release, and I'll try to mention most of them as we go along. YouTuber LXShadow has already shown off a couple demos that seem to be even earlier than this one. I'll link to his videos in the description. This demo has a few different levels to pick from, which has Spyro and his friends doing various tasks. However, after we go through the levels as intended, there are still more things to find which we can get to using hacking. The devs clearly only went and blocked off certain areas while compiling the demo, instead of removing them, so we can still access them. For this first part, however, I'll only be doing a regular playthrough of the demo to show what was intended to be seen. First thing to point out is that the logo for the game is different. Second thing to notice is that this demo has radically different music than the final game. The reason for this is that the game's final composers were only hired 6 weeks before the game came out. This demo's composer is unknown as far as I'm aware, and they likely got fired. The intro cutscene is pretty much the same, except it's missing the dialogue with the professor. And Red has a very strange laugh. The skybox is very different and is actually what the file select thumbnail for this level in the final game shows. Spyro has a slightly different model than in the final game. It still exists in the final game's files, but isn't used. The first thing to point out about the actual gameplay is that the controls are a lot more sluggish than in the final game. Every time you charge, you do the charge from standstill animation from the final game, no matter if you're moving or not. This is more annoying than it sounds. The camera is also a lot slower. Some of the gem containers have very different designs. The HUD also has different looking elements. The positions of the collectibles are very different from the final game, which is strange because they were closer to the final game in earlier demos. Not sure why they would have changed it. This isn't shown in the video, but the tentacles in front of Nasty's lair give Spyro a knockback but no damage. The dialogue with moneybags is pretty much the same as in the final game.
Oh, Spyro! How nice to see you. I was hoping to remodel my third home and no one overpays like you. Oh, but don't bother coming back here until you've got 500 gems, okay? I'm sorry, Spyro. I only associate with people who have at least 500 gems to spare.
We never actually get to double jump up this tall ledge in the starting area, but we'll explore it later anyway.
I am not a fan of new money, but it is money after all. So, go inside and buy a lockpick.
The shop is very different, with clearly placeholder icons.
My favorite wallet.
The pricing of the items and the menu sound effects are also different.
That really is a good choice. You already bought a lockpick. Why don't you use it to get some more gems to spend with me?
The animation for Sparks opening the gate has no dialogue and is overall quite different. There's a gate with a switch before coming to the bridge area, which is normally after this area. We're also never directly taught how checkpoints work. Instead, the game simply says restart point set when you get zapped. As well as this, Zoe's model is completely different and closer to her original design in the earlier games. The first person mode is rather interesting, as it seems to imitate the first person mode of the earlier games, as you can see the back of Spyro's head when looking at certain angles. Strangely, the y-axis of the first person camera is inverted, and setting it to inverted makes it normal. The map screen is quite different. It only has the task screen and help screen available. You'll also notice that the map lacks a lot of areas. The only part of the maps in this demo that is shown are the areas that you're meant to play in. Also, the first realm is named Dragon's Homeland instead of Dragon Kingdom like in the final game. Elder Thomas, who is only referred to as Dragon Elder here, stands where Ember would normally stand in the final game. His dialogue animation is only slightly different, so in the final game he still points to the left of him when referring to the Dark Gem, even though it's not to his left in the final game. Funny how some things in this demo explains weird inconsistencies and oddities in the final game.
I'd tell you the whole story, but I'm old and I take a really long time to tell stories. So, how about I just tell you how to destroy the Dark Gems instead?
Whew, close one. Yeah, do that.
To destroy Dark Gems, you should use your home dive. Look, there's a Dark Gem just over there. Why don't you try that horn dive I was telling you about?
The gate to the second Dark Gem that normally opens with a switch cannot be opened here. Don't worry, we'll explore beyond this point later. There is no passage to Crocodile Swamp like in the final game, as it doesn't exist in this demo. Instead, we collect the light gem and the demo spits us back to the title screen. Also, the sound for collectibles are different. The second level is the gliding tutorial from the final game, and it starts pretty much the same.
Yo, Spyro, did you know you can use the double jump to glide further? So, double jump and glide already, buddy. If you find a dragon egg and get back here safely, I'll open the door.
We can try going back, but there's a rock blocking the way. Sparks eats butterflies despite being on full health, which is something he also does in the older games, but they changed this in the final game.
You can use the double jump and glide to travel further. Glide over these ledges to find a dragon egg.
There are bumps in the wall in this area, which were for whatever reason removed. The first enemy you encounter has an idle animation which is never seen in the final game. The sound effects for the enemies' weapons are also different. There is a pink Nork in the room where there would normally be a blue Nork, probably because the blue Norks hadn't been completely finished at this point. Dragon eggs have different collecting sounds than light gems, which isn't the case in the final game. Also, the game says that's one of Nanny's dragon eggs, which refers to a character that we never meet in this demo. The next area has archer enemies instead of a hammer enemy, and they seem to be intended for target practice with the fire bombs found in this area. This was slightly changed, since these enemies are fairly difficult for new players to deal with. The fire bombs also use a placeholder model. The fire symbol on the HUD is also different. The armored enemies have a lot more invincibility frames after getting their armor knocked off. There's an entirely cut line of dialogue from Hunter upon finishing this part of the demo.
Nice one, Spyro, you did it! Now I'll open the door so you can get out of here.
We never get to see where Spyro walks off to, but we'll explore that area later. Next is the Hunter Challenge level, which is Hunter's part of Dragonfly Falls. Interestingly, the entirety of this level is actually in this demo, though it'll only let us play this part. We'll explore the rest of it later on. The double jump timing is much more strict in this demo than in the final game, which results in my death a few times. Hunter's mid-air attack sound effects are broken. Interestingly, you can jump out of the water after landing in it, and you take 1 hit point of damage every time you fall in it. This was probably removed since there are no points in the game where you could reach land using this. The deflect animation is slightly different, and there are no particle effects when you deflect the projectile. Interestingly, there's a third hit in the punch combo, which only has 2 hits in the final game. However, it's just as buggy, so it's practically impossible to hit any enemies with it. The third hit was also seen in the trailer, so it was likely a last-minute removal. The same placeholder graphic for the fire bombs, as well as the fire icon on the HUD, is also used for Hunter's fire arrows. The climbing is practically identical to the final game. this demo doesn't allow you to save at the same checkpoint multiple times for whatever reason. The fodder creatures have a different design to the final game. There isn't much different to the rest of the level. After collecting the light gem, the demo spits us back to the title screen. The Sergeant Byrd minigame is, for whatever reason, called Maxi-game in this demo. This level is the Lava Palava Sergeant Byrd stage, which is simply referred to as Sergeant Byrd Lava Speedway here. The targets can only be auto-targeted with bombs. In the final game, you can auto-target them with both bombs and missiles. Other than this, there isn't a whole lot different about this Maxi game, other than a few changed graphics and sound effects. After beating the stage, it spits you back to the main menu. Normally in the final game, it forces Sergeant Byrd to turn back to the stage when reaching the edge of the area, but here there is just an invisible wall. Thank you for watching. The next part will showcase some out-of-bounds areas which can be found in Dragon Village.